This morning we have Ndindi Nyoro MP Kiharu constituency. Good morning, karibu sana.
Morning to you, thank you very much.
And Didymus Barasa MP Kimilili constituency.
Sana.
We are still hoping to be joined by one more person, but we'll introduce them as soon as we get them into studio. But let's start off with this preparations. When you talk about, because this is just an issue of money, and this is what the National Assembly has been talking about. If you look at the dailies, counties are still complaining about not receiving monies. I bet it still has to do with the budgetary allocations. Senate says they will fight that reduction of 9 billion shillings meant to go to the counties. How exactly they will do that, I do not know. Does that open a new battlefront between the Senate and the National Assembly? But of course, you know what you did last week, and you are very proud of it. You passed the finance bill as it was. The reservations brought back by President Uhuru Kenyatta, even with some of those adjustments that had not originated from the National Assembly, you just passed it and entertained us to quite a lot of drama. Yes? And according to your colleagues who were on the panel yesterday, they said that drama was purely cosmetic. You all had decided what you were going to do, and anything else was just playing to the public gallery, that you had already decided you're going to pass it because, as far as you're concerned, what you wanted, and that was CDF and other kitties allocated to Parliament, were okay. So you're only playing to the public gallery to show them, we're still with you. But in as far as your concerns deep inside, you knew you were sorted, and that's why you did all that. So all that dancing and shouting and screaming in Parliament was purely cosmetic. Didymus Barasa, is that true?
It's not true at all. It is good that we have my friend who is an economist here. I didn't support the supplementary budget because to me it was against the law and constitutional. We had first to deal with the presidential reservations first, because the presidential reservation that will pave way for that supplementary budget. And my view was that we look into the budget estimates in totality to avoid a scenario where you are focusing and cutting money from very important functions of government, the functions that impact Kenyans directly. To me, and I still maintain that we ought to have looked into the Big Four agenda, drop one of the agenda so that we can fund the very important functions of education, healthcare, and roads. This is what drives the economy of this country. And even as economists are trying to work away on things which will make Kenya look good in the international map. In terms of the IMF conditions, that for us to qualify to get a STADFI credit facility, we must really collect more money, because our debt ceiling is beyond what is recommended. But we ought not to have come up with some measures which are austerity measures which are punitive to the common mwananchi, because the common mwananchi, from the levels of Mama Mboga, the hawkers, the people who do small businesses to earn a living, completely suffering. Today, everything has gone up, including I've been receiving messages from banking institutions that are in line of the Finance Bill 2018. The exercise duties are going up, and I think it's only a matter of time that Kenyans will begin to experience the pinch of what was approved by Parliament.
And that's exactly my point, that Kenyans will experience the pinch, and even all those austerity measures that the President had outlined, including a significant cut on the CDF. That everything else passed, but when it came to CDF, that is the only thing that you saved.
I think what Kenyans should understand that what the presidency has done on CDF was completely unconstitutional and illegal. CDF is a percentage of the total budget. So whether you will say you are reducing or anything, it either reduces itself automatically or increases itself automatically.
Wouldn't you therefore say it is the same thing with the money is allocated to counties, because even them, it is supposed to be a percentage of the total
Absolutely.
budgetary allocation?
I agree with you.
So you disagree even with the cuts?
With the county, let me tell you, the only meaningful money that Kenyans, that has played a very important role in changing the lives of Kenyans are these devolved funds. CDF, GAV, this county government. Of course, I know for a fact that we have some governors who are being investigated for improprieties. But this is the money that goes to direct investments on the things that improves the lives of the Kenyan people. And really, we need to have increased these kind of allocations, but not reducing.
It is statements like the one that your colleague is making that people are saying are not genuine. That on one hand you say, yes, you oppose all these cuts, but yet you know and you understand the need to actually tax Kenyans and some of the austerity measures because, yes, the government needs money. You, yes, definitely understand what the president needs, but you also understand the need to play to the gallery.
I think I will not dwell so much on what has happened because now that is water under the bridge. But I would want to set some things straight. First of all, in regards to what members of parliament purported their budgets being cut. And I want to start from CDF and say that actually before we started debating the reservations by the president, the recommendation he gave, CDF per constituency was around 120 million per annum. And ultimately, after the debate and after the signing of the new finance bill now with amendments, it came down to 110. But it's also important for people to know because there has been this concerted effort, I don't know from where, to portray like as members of parliament only care about ourselves. And caring about ourselves, of course, CDF is attached, PSC is attached, PSC budget, and ETC. I want to say even actually in the same memoranda, we actually cut even the budget for roads. And this budget for roads is squarely under us because members of parliament are the patrons of CRC, which is the constituency roads committees across the country. We had allocated 30 million per constituency before for repair of roads given the heavy rains that we just received several months ago. Of course, that had to go, and so many other things, including our own budget in parliament. And therefore, even when we debate in parliament, myself talking on my behalf and so many other members, including my colleague, we actually don't go there to talk about ourselves. Very few members of parliament, including myself, and I'm saying this with all honesty, actually even knows our salaries.
Because it is said that the president cleverly used that factor of CDF to actually get you to pass his memoranda. Because yes, he put it there and said, yes, even CDF will be cut by about close to 6 billion shillings. But that managed to come down to a very small figure, as you said. The reduction per constituency is about 10 million shillings, which is less than 10% reduction. Yes, but when it came to monies allocated to the counties, that 9 billion cut was not changed. Definitely. Members of the National Assembly had an incentive to actually pass.
Actually, Fred, look at the percentage, because you can talk about 9 billion, but in comparison of what? We are comparing 9 billion to over 300 billion shillings, and some, I mean, a lot of money that goes to the counties in hundreds of billions. And when you talk about CDF, we are talking comparatively to around 30-something billion that goes to CDF. But going actually beyond that debate, Fred, because I have to be honest, and it's good even when we are in Jubilee to talk the truth, I'm very worried about our borrowing, and I'm extremely worried even about our recurrent expenditure. Because there is no way, even when you are running a shop, you can be collecting, like in the last financial year, of course, KRA actually never met their target. They collected roughly around 1.5 trillion. Out of that amount, of course, our wage bill currently is close to 400 billion in the national government alone. Then you go again, add the amount that sustains these salaries. Because being paid a salary is one thing. There is rent for you. There is other subordinate services to sustain this officer. It goes again even more than that salary. Ultimately, what is left for capital development is so little to stimulate the economy. What do we end up doing? We end up actually borrowing. We are borrowing, first of all, to pay, because one of the charge of our budget currently, actually the highest, is not even education or defense or the other one. It is actually paying debt.
Yes.
And I was reading the Current Economist magazine, and I got a very interesting perspective that Zambia currently, they are actually going to an overdrive of finding Zambians, like on traffic rules, on traffic offenses, etc., because they are in a concerted effort to raise revenues. They have raised some funny tax measures, including online coal taxes, borehole taxes, funny things, because they are cornered at the moment. And the genesis of them being cornered, of course, is over borrowing.
Do you see us going there?
Fred, I can tell you currently we are at 57% debt to GDP ratio. Yes, our GDP has grown. Kenya, we are talking about a GDP of $8.5 trillion Kenya shillings, which is actually, we are 69th the biggest economy in the world, which is a good thing. But again, we have to, and the issue actually, Fred, is not about even ratio to GDP, blah, blah. Because a country like Japan has a much bigger debt, even compared to their GDP. Their GDP, their debt to GDP ratio is actually over 240%. United States is around 104%. It is beyond their current GDP. Kenya is lower. The issue is, first of all, cost. Because you may have a very high debt, especially to GDP ratio, or even aggregate debt. But then, if you go to a country like Japan, when our CBR, just the other day, our monetary policy committee met, and they retained our CBR. CBR is the rate at which central bank lends to our commercial banks at 9%. You go to a country like Morocco, the same day, they retained theirs at 2.25%. Yesterday, Fed in the US increased actually to 2.25, an increase. When you go to Japan, cost of borrowing barely almost zero. So the issue is cost. At the current cost that you are borrowing, it is actually not sustainable for us to continue borrowing. Okay. We have to look at the other revenue raising measures, which are number one, and very definite we have to do, is to increase our tax bracket, to increase our breadth, not our depth.
And it's very interesting listening to the members of the National Assembly talk about these things, because let's be honest, the budget making process is a concern of the National Assembly. It is part of your main duties right now according to the new constitution. So you scrutinize the budgetary appropriations, you scrutinize the finance bill. At the end of the day, the kind of process we saw in Parliament last Thursday is what we end up with, and a day later we're paying a lot more. Surely, are you saying that the National Assembly has handled this particular process in the best way possible?
You see, for some of us who are genuine about what we say, and genuine about what Kenyans goes through, we have always been concerned, and our issue with the Treasury, with the KRA, with the government has been that instead of overtaxing Kenyans to raise revenue for running of the government, what they are supposed to do is to widen the tax base, creating a enabling environment for businesses to thrive. If you are running a business enterprise, you begin to open branches across the country, that means more revenue for the government. And also increase the efficiency on tax collections by the Kenya Revenue Authority. Try to block or to minimize the issues of tax evasions, not KRA colluding with the business people, with the importers.
I hear you, Mheshimiwa.
This is what is going to improve. And also prudent financial management that includes not putting this Kenya into.
And you guys have brilliant ideas. You're an economist. You have brilliant ideas. You seem to know the solution. Yet this process of budget making is actually yours.
Let me tell you.
How come it comes out at the other end, and what we see from members of the National Assembly is dancing and chaos inside the House?
What ails the National Assembly is the mindset of the people like Kimani Ichung'wah who think that they are government ministers. The people, the chairpersons of the committees who have the responsibility to do things in accordance with the principle of separation of power between the presidency and the National Assembly, but these people think that they are the extension of the executive, and what they are doing is that they are raping, interfering with the independence of the National Assembly. To begin, they have turned the National Assembly or other parliaments into some sort of an annex of the executive. They are being advised by the same economists who are advising the presidency. So, this is where we go wrong as a country.
So as it is right now, the National Assembly, in as far as budget making process, it is paralyzed. Because, and you do understand, the budget making process is a preserve of the National Assembly. And that is just according to the Constitution.
Fred, even beyond the Constitution making, because you have many more roles, I have to say that I cannot come here and pretend that I can be this kind of an independent thinker and member of Parliament away from my party. The reason why I was elected on a Jubilee ticket is because there was some evaluation from the Kenyan people on what kind of policies they want going forward, and they chose the Jubilee policy. And this is not far-fetched. Just now, currently, on international media, there is this guy called Kavanaugh. I'm sure you've seen even on the new Supreme...
On CNN and BBC.
The Supreme Court. I was avoiding mentioning our competition, but that's fine. The reason why Trump is very sure that Kavanaugh will go through even with the allegations is because the conservatives in the US, who are called, what's the name of this party?
Republicans.
The Republicans, they know they have the numbers in Senate. Going to Theresa May in the UK, he is now pushing for better deals from the EU in terms of the Brexit, because he's hedging his strength on the members of parliament. So this is not a new thing I'm trying to purport. The ruling party usually, and parties always seek to have majority in houses so that they can push their agenda. But that does not mean that then there should never be any voice that goes...
Independent thinking does not exist in the National Assembly. That is what you say.
It exists, but what I'm just trying to say is that in so many democracies, including Kenya, people first of all meet as parties so that we agree on the agenda we are pushing, even on the floor. And therefore, I cannot purport that I can have just a singular thought of Ndindi Nyoro when pushing my agenda, because first of all, a singular voice in politics means nothing, because you'd just be talking too much and loudly, but numbers count. So, I need to say this. There are so many things that Jubilee has done, and we cannot just come with a blanket of the few bad things and say now that Jubilee has failed. Jubilee has done exemplary in matters of infrastructure, has done exemplary in so many matters, but you're only pointing, and even myself as a member of Jubilee, I have liberty to point on where we can improve.
Don't you think that
and that is my role.
Don't you think that this time the kind of suffering Kenyans are faced with, in as far as heavy taxation on petroleum products, on excise duty on mobile phones, on money transfer and all these things, you don't think this is a special time, that this is something different that we've not seen in years?
And that is actually
that
where...
could be identified as a special circumstance?
That is where I actually started on. And I started by pointing out where we can improve as a government. And I can tell you direct, because sometimes we give a lot, we engage in a lot of obesity and give terms without actually offering solutions. And that is what we should be doing. Not coming here on Citizen and say, Uhuru, amefanya hii. Let us actually give solutions. And I have several. One, from where I sit, government has a 35% stake in Safaricom, for example. Safaricom currently has a market capitalization, or the worth of Safaricom in the market is around 1 trillion Kenya shillings. And therefore, government has an investment in Safaricom, holding all the factors constant, of 350 billion. The president was in the US just previously, signed a deal with Bechel. Of course, the best deal would have been they build the road, they charge toll on the users, and they recover their money. But they are insisting on debt. Now, let us come back home. We have several investments going on. Fred, government already charges corporate tax of 30%. What this means in layman's term is that government has a stake in Royal Media of 30%. Because all the profits you make, by the way, without even mentioning pay and all the other taxes, government is a shareholder in Royal Media. Because they will come and demand for 30% corporate tax.
The same on Safaricom as
well. On Safaricom as well. So why can't we sell this 35% stake? The railway, for example, the one we are extending, instead of adding more cost in terms of borrowing, we sell this stake. But some other pundits will come and say, but government last year was given 40 billion by Safaricom in taxes and dividends. Yes, government has around 14 billion shares. This is just one of the things I'm trying to using to drive the point home. Government has a 14 billion shares in Safaricom. They received around 15 billion in dividends. So the government would need around 22 to 30 years holding the dividend constant, which is actually not feasible, to recover the investment in Safaricom. So as a business person, government being a business person, this is the opportune time, for example, for them to exit from some of these entities.
Such a brilliant idea. And my question is, you sit in the National Assembly. The kind of dancing we saw on Thursday, and that is the manner in which the National Assembly presided over what Kenyans are now experiencing. Don't you think that these brilliant ideas are what should have been the subject of discussion in the National Assembly, in as far as budget-making process is concerned, in as far as even helping Treasury to come up with better revenue avenues, in as far as even contributing to the innovative ideas that this country can actually collect and manage its budget better? Now you're telling us this. You've had all this knowledge. You sit in the National Assembly, yet what we saw on Thursday was dancing and screaming. And now, today, we're suffering, according to what we're seeing in the dailies.
I fully concur, and I go back to my point that politics is about numbers. It's good when I come here, I air my views, but the same views I air even in our PG. And I can tell you I'm characterizing, there is something clusterizing. The current privatization laws in this country are very detrimental to the current situation we are in terms of having so many entities owned by government, because it is very restrictive. After LICO, the debacle from LICO, the previous Parliament House made it very hard for government to privatize. I'm already on the mission of amending our privatization laws.
Because it is possible.
It is possible, and I'm doing. By the way, I've already written to the Speaker.
Yes.
It is in the process. Why am I saying all this, Fred? Safaricom is just one entity that I've given.
Yes.
In the same juxtaposition, can you imagine GOK is trying to bail out Portland Cement to a tune of 15 billion Kenya shillings? You're getting? We tax Kenyans on this head because we want to raise some 35 or so billion.
To bail out a corporate organization.
Not even corporate. Do you know something? Portland Cement is actually a private entity because government is bailing out, and I asked this to the PS the other day in our committee. Government has a 25% stake in Portland. NSSF had a 27% stake in Portland. So they were purporting previously to combine this shareholding, coming to around 52%, and categorizing Portland Cement as a parastatal. The court already ruled that you cannot term NSSF shareholding as government shareholding because these are contributors' money. So after all is said and done, those are some of the prudence that we need in management of our finances.
See, Ndimuli,
Yes.
the problem that this country is facing is Parliament. And I want to disagree with my friend. He had very brilliant ideas, but I want to tell him that I am a Jubilee Member of Parliament. There is no single day that the party leader of the Secretary General has called for a parliamentary group meeting to discuss some of his matters.
Any ideas?
So if you want the members of Parliament in your party to support you, you must involve them in these austerity measures, in
coming up with general ideas.
Coming up with general ideas. But don't call for a party group meeting to tell them the position that already the government has already taken up. We will go to fight in the National Assembly. So if for a fact that I am a proud member of a Jubilee party, and my role is to assist my party to run government because we were elected on the basis of our promise to the Kenyan people. But again, we must have forums, party forums, where I can attend as a member of Jubilee, not as a member of Parliament.
And to go and give
and
these
to
ideas.
go and give these ideas
Because
so that a bill comes in Parliament, something, even the presidential reservation comes in Parliament when our views has been actually engraved in his reservation, that we'll just support and approve. But if you sit somewhere with a few individuals who are not even, who have other interests, you're coming up with something to force it on the National Assembly, you expect me, as because I'm a member of Parliament on your party, to support you, I will look at the interests of Kenyans and oppose within the strongest time possible.
Gentlemen, and as your colleague said, you need to agree that the National Assembly has indeed become the biggest problem and the biggest impediment to Kenya. Because, granted, look at your colleague, Ndindi Nyoro. He came up with legislation that was very unpopular to the banking sector. The kind of lobbying and the might that the banking sector has to actually lobby through anything, including lobbying at the level of the executive, was massive. This is one individual, and he managed to do it. Up till today, yes, we can actually say we enjoy lower interest rates when it comes to borrowing. Whether or not it has affected the economy in another way, but it happens and it is possible. Don't you think that that's a kind of legislative push we need from the individual brilliant minds like yourself, Ndindi Nyoro, like yourself, Didymus Barasa, very young, very energetic? Are you going to sit back and just be used as a Jubilee rubber stamp, as an executive rubber stamp? As you said, Parliament has become an annex of the executive. Is that what you've been reduced to?
I don't think so. There are so many things we have done in Parliament which are very good, Fred. And even judging by the finance bill itself, the way we had taken it back to President to sign the initial one, you can see the input of Parliament was purely pro-Wajiko. But of course now maybe when you are a government leader, you have much more things to balance. And I'm not trying to speak for the president. What I'm just trying to say is that these voices that we are having, and people have ideas, probably other members of Parliament have better ideas than ourselves. We have been doing a lot of legislative work in so many facets. First of all, in the fight against corruption. There's, you know, Parliament is not an instant coffee thing. That now I've been a member of Parliament for 1 year, you tell me, show me what you've done. The process itself of making a bill in Parliament, 1 year is not enough. I've been writing a bill, for example, to help the president in the fight against corruption and to help our country in the fight against corruption. And actually I was to introduce capital punishment, even by hanging for some of these guys. But of course, it went through some stages in Parliament. I was told this is not possible because, first of all, it's against our own constitution in terms of the right for life. Mm-hmm. Now we are introducing life sentence. That bill has gone through budget committee. They said it's not a money bill. It's now going through JLAC. It's a process. I've just given an example of another one I'm doing in terms of privatization. It cannot just happen instant. It is a process. Parliament is doing its work. We just need time for the fruits to bear. But I can tell you even from where we sit, because it's not like the guys in executive have monopoly on knowledge, economic matters, for example, when you sit in Treasury. Yes. I can tell you, Fred, without blinking of an eye, we have a problem in our Treasury.
It's no longer Parliament, it's Treasury.
And I can tell you this as a Jubilee member. Uhuru has a much bigger mandate. And of course, as a president, you rely so much on the advice of the people around you. Because that is exactly why we create these offices, so that they give you expert advice. There is a big problem in Treasury. When you look at, and I want to be comparative, look at our monetary policy, look at our monetary environment. I can tell you the CBK governor is one of the best governors Kenya has ever had. Mm-hmm. Even with all these hurabaloo, even with all these tides and storms, our monetary environment is very stable. Our inflation has been very stable for the longest time. Look at our local currency, very stable. But when you come to the physical side, we have a big problem. And the physical side is what is responsible for driving the economy. Fred, when we come here, and I'm sure so many other people are watching, especially business people, we are doing all these projects, and this is very good for our country. But I can tell you, there is no money in the pockets of Kenyans. That tells you there is a hitch, there is a gap somewhere in our physical planning. Mm-hmm. And that lies squarely with the CS Treasury, with the Treasury as an institution, and I think we need to look at that so that we bring about, let me give you just one example.
Yes, and even as we do that, because the main thing and the main reason why we invite members of the National Assembly or the Senate is because we believe your role of oversight and legislation is key in a lot of these things. Yeah. But the kind of dancing we saw on Thursday, and that is the way that you, members of the National Assembly, chose to preside over a bill that now affects Kenyans so dearly. Yet you have all this leeway, you have all this brilliance. Don't you think that members of Parliament are just the ones failing us? You said it. Do you agree?
I don't think so. And because you have the clips, I am sure one day you'll call some of those dancers, because I wasn't one of them. But I can tell you, as I've said, we have a problem. All the other things, when you talk about manufacturing, when you talk about roads, etc., all these things are planned. And all these things, when we plan them, the engine of advising the president on the direction, the global direction of the economy is actually Treasury. And I think we are not doing right in that facet.
Even Parliament, because if at all you see the problem is Treasury, as you said, is there any role that Parliament can do to remedy that?
We are already doing some of those things, and I want to tell you some of the things, Fred, and I've said this before. I was in Uganda, I think a month or so ago, and I was surprised beyond measure. Do you know Uganda is currently, in this year alone, 4 months this year, Uganda has had a positive BOP against Kenya, something that has never happened ever. This has something to do either with taxation, because what explains a landlocked country like Uganda is exporting more to Kenya than we are exporting to them. This is some of the things I'm talking about, physical planning.
Okay.
Whether you talk about food security, because the reason why we had those misbalances was purely because we imported a lot of food from Uganda. Whatever you may call it, whatever explanation tells you there is somewhere we are going wrong in our physical planning.
Okay.
Let me tell you...
Failure by the executive can be blamed also on the National Assembly because you oversight the executive.
Yes, and let me tell you why Parliament, what affects the quality of our national parliaments. Parliament is a product of the production line of political parties. If you have parties that are completely disorganized, you know, in advanced democracy countries like UK, like the US, you have parties that have a clear policy on matters that affect their people. If it is matters of taxation, they are known for their policy. There's our policy on taxation is this. Our policy on healthcare is this. But if you have a party that comes up with manifestos during electioneering periods and the same manifesto changes depending on the politics of the day, then Parliament becomes unstable. As a member of Parliament for Jubilee, I would want to see a scenario where any member of Parliament elected on whatever party to the National Assembly or Senate completely understands that this is the policies of my party that we are depending, and there is no given time that such a policies will change because of politics of the day. This is the difference between Kenyan politics and American politics. What we need to do is that we need to re-engineer political parties to be centered on matters of good governance, matters that affect the economy, matters that are geared towards improving the economy of our people, so that Parliament will be predictable. But we are speaking now, Parliament is completely unpredictable. You don't know what NASA will come up tomorrow. You don't know what Jubilee Party will come up tomorrow.
Even the ideology of Jubilee,
even
is
the
social
ideology
democrat or
because
that's the basic understanding that probably a social democrat.
Absolutely.
But do you really believe that the kind of things we see with this kind that you still espouse that ideology of social democrat?
I don't see completely, because the way Parliament behaves, it replicates what individual parties are behaving. Tomorrow, I tell you for a fact that if NASA are going to come up, for example, with something that will assist them, take over power, they will bring it to the National Assembly. Tomorrow, if Jubilee decides to come up with something that either will make it continue holding to power or achieve anything, like for example, the issues of fuel is increasing not because of a matter of policy, but it's because the government needs money to fund its budget. It's not because of the dynamism of our economy that is forcing our fuel to go up. It defeats the very same logic saying that fuel that Uganda is selling is cheaper than Kenya, yet the same fuel is transported through our land from Mombasa to Uganda. But when it arrives in Uganda, we expect it to be much more expensive than in Kenya. But it's not because of the dynamism of the economy, but it's because of some factors that could have been avoided.
Wow.
Yeah.